In the summer of 1956, a low-profile Hollywood stuntman named Lane Harkness vanished. His disappearance barely made the trade papers. No investigation. No obituary. Just silence. For decades, Lane Harkness was a footnote, one of thousands who worked the margins of the film industry during Hollywood's golden age. But in the late 1990s, a discovery in Paramount Studios' storage facilities would raise questions that still echo today. Questions about the CIA, smuggled weapons, and whether the movies we watched were hiding something far more dangerous than fiction. Lane Harkness was born in 1921 in Bakersfield, California. The son of an oil rigger, he grew up understanding hard work and harder falls. By the late 1940s, after a brief stint in the Army during World War II, he'd found his way to Hollywood. Not as a leading man. Not even as a character actor. But as a stuntman, one of the anonymous bodies who took the hits, the falls, the crashes that made westerns believable. His specialty was horse work and staged gunfights, the kind of rough choreography that defined B-westerns of the era. He was competent. Reliable. Forgettable. Exactly the kind of man intelligence agencies have always preferred. The late 1940s and early 1950s were the peak years for Western films. Studios churned them out by the dozen, low-budget programmers shot fast and cheap in the deserts of California, Arizona, and increasingly, Mexico. Paramount, Republic, Monogram, these studios operated like factories. Crews would travel south of the border for location shooting, where labor was cheaper, regulations looser, and the landscapes suitably desolate. It was efficient. It was profitable. And according to some researchers, it provided perfect cover for activities that had nothing to do with entertainment. Film crews crossing borders with equipment crates raised no suspicions. After all, they were just making movies. Between 1949 and 1956, Lane Harkness worked on at least 37 Western productions. Most were forgettable titles: Desert Ambush, Rio Grande Raiders, Gunsmoke Valley. He was never credited in major roles, but production records and call sheets place him consistently on sets throughout this period. What's notable is the pattern. Nearly half of these productions involved location shooting in northern Mexico, particularly around Sonora and Chihuahua. Harkness appeared on manifests for these trips with unusual frequency. For a mid-tier stuntman, his travel record was ambitious. Some of his colleagues later recalled that Lane seemed to volunteer for Mexican shoots, even when better-paying work was available in California. To understand the theory, we need to understand the era. By 1949, the Cold War was solidifying. The Soviet Union had detonated its first atomic bomb. China had fallen to communism. American intelligence agencies were expanding operations worldwide, often through unconventional means. The CIA, established just 2 years earlier, was experimenting with covert methodologies. We now know the agency used front companies, cultural programs, even abstract expressionist art as cover for operations. The idea of using Hollywood, an industry built on illusion and international logistics, isn't as far-fetched as it might sound. The film industry already had infrastructure in place. Relationships, trust, and plausible deniability. Here's where official history becomes murky. Operation Southgate appears in declassified documents from the early 1950s, but only in fragments. What we know is this: it was a CIA operation focused on Central America, likely involving weapons transfers to anti-communist militias in Guatemala and Nicaragua. The operation was apparently compromised in late 1956. After that, references to Southgate disappear from accessible records. The timing is striking. Lane Harkness vanished in October 1956. The same month Operation Southgate is believed to have collapsed. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the alignment has fueled decades of speculation among researchers who study Cold War covert operations. In 1998, during a routine inventory at Paramount's warehouse facility in Sun Valley, California, studio archivists discovered something unusual. Buried beneath decades of accumulated props and set pieces were 23 wooden crates marked with production codes from 1952 to 1955. The crates were labeled as containing stunt equipment and replica firearms for various Western productions. But when opened, several contained genuine military-grade weapons. Not props. Real rifles and pistols, some still wrapped in protective oilcloth. The studio contacted authorities. The ATF investigated. No charges were filed. The official explanation was administrative confusion from the era. But researchers noted something else. Lane Harkness's signature appeared on inventory cards associated with at least 6 of these crates. How would such a scheme work? The theory proposes that genuine weapons were smuggled into Mexico disguised among film equipment. Studio trucks crossed borders regularly, carrying cameras, lights, props, including replica guns by the hundreds. Customs officials rarely inspected film company vehicles thoroughly. The industry was trusted, respected. Once in Mexico, the theory suggests, real weapons were offloaded under cover of production activity, then distributed to recipients further south. The empty crates would be refilled with actual prop weapons and returned to studios. A closed loop. The beauty of the system, if it existed, was its simplicity. No complex cover identities. No elaborate spycraft. Just movie people making movies. Why Lane Harkness specifically? According to this theory, his role was logistical coordination, essentially, a field courier. As a stuntman, he had legitimate reasons to be on location. He wasn't important enough to attract attention, but skilled enough to be trusted with complex tasks. Former colleagues described him as detail-oriented and good with paperwork, unusual traits for stunt performers. One assistant director, interviewed in 2003 before his death, recalled that Harkness always seemed to be checking manifests and crate inventories, behavior that seemed odd at the time. The theory suggests he was ensuring the right containers went to the right places. And that the contents matched classified specifications, not shooting scripts. Northern Mexico in the 1950s was strategic territory. The region served as a transit point for goods and people moving towards Central America. The Mexican government maintained complex relationships with the United States, sometimes cooperating with American intelligence, sometimes looking the other way. Film productions operating in Sonora and Chihuahua would have been noticed but not necessarily scrutinized. Local authorities welcomed the economic activity. And the remote desert locations, perfect for Western cinematography, also provided isolation for activities that required discretion. Several of the films Harkness worked on shot near Ciudad Obregón and Hermosillo. Towns with airports, rail connections, and proximity to smuggling routes that had existed since Prohibition. What evidence actually exists? First, the Paramount crates and Harkness's signature on related documents. Second, his unusual travel frequency to Mexican location shoots. Third, the timing of his disappearance with Operation Southgate's failure. Fourth, declassified documents confirming the CIA used civilian cover for covert operations during this exact period. Fifth, testimony from former studio employees noting irregularities in equipment inventories from the era. None of this proves the theory. But it creates a circumstantial pattern that researchers find compelling. The counterargument is equally straightforward: correlation isn't causation, and documentary evidence remains fragmentary at best. The archive has gaps. Convenient gaps, some would say. Those who knew Lane described a man who kept to himself. He wasn't antisocial, but he maintained boundaries. He drank modestly, didn't gamble, and avoided the industry's social circuit. One of his roommates in Los Angeles later recalled that Lane got mail from strange places and occasionally received late-night phone calls that seemed to make him anxious. He had no known family and few close friends. This profile, isolated, reliable, discreet, fits intelligence asset recruitment criteria. Or, it describes thousands of working-class men in post-war America trying to make ends meet in a precarious industry. The psychological profile can be read multiple ways, depending on your assumptions. Which is precisely what makes conspiracy theory so resilient. October 1956. Lane Harkness was scheduled to work on Apache Canyon, a Republic Pictures Western shooting in Arizona. He never appeared on set. His modest apartment in North Hollywood showed no signs of struggle or hurried departure. Rent was paid through the end of the month. His few possessions remained untouched. He simply vanished. No police report was filed. Studio records show his contract was terminated for abandonment. There was no search, no follow-up, no questions asked. This lack of investigation is either unremarkable, transient workers disappeared regularly in that era, or deeply suspicious. If Harkness was compromised or extracted, his handlers would have wanted exactly this, quiet erasure. A man who'd never been particularly visible becoming permanently invisible. What happened to Operation Southgate? Declassified documents suggest the operation was exposed through a security breach, possibly involving Mexican intelligence. Several CIA assets in Central America were reportedly compromised or killed in late 1956. The operation's details remain classified, but its failure is documented. Some researchers believe the Paramount weapons cache was intended for Southgate's militia contacts. When the operation collapsed, the weapons became liabilities, too dangerous to move, too sensitive to destroy. So they were forgotten. Left in storage where they'd presumably never be found. Except, of course, they were. 46 years later, they told a story. Or at least, suggested one. Not everyone accepts the conspiracy theory. Skeptics offer simpler explanations. Perhaps Harkness was involved in freelance smuggling, an independent operator running guns for profit, not patriotism. Criminal networks used film industry logistics for smuggling throughout the 20th century. Or maybe the Paramount weapons were legitimate studio inventory that was simply mislabeled, and Harkness's signatures were routine paperwork from someone handling prop weapons. His disappearance could be personal, debt, a relationship, mental health crisis. Occam's razor suggests we shouldn't attribute to conspiracy what ordinary human chaos can explain. But Occam's razor also tells us that sometimes, the simplest explanation is that powerful organizations do things in secret. We know the CIA cultivated relationships with Hollywood throughout the Cold War. The agency consulted on films, influenced scripts, and recruited industry professionals for various purposes. Declassified documents from the Church Committee hearings in the 1970s confirmed these connections. The agency used journalists, academics, and cultural figures as assets. Why not stuntmen? Why not production crews? The infrastructure was perfect: international travel, equipment transport, cash transactions, temporary employment that created no long-term paper trails. The agency has never commented specifically on Lane Harkness or Operation Southgate's alleged connection to Paramount. The official position is silence, which proves nothing. But it certainly doesn't disprove anything either. The Harkness theory gained traction through the work of film historian Margaret Chen, who spent 15 years investigating Cold War-era Hollywood. Her 2008 book, Shadows in the Desert, compiled the evidence and interviews with surviving crew members from Harkness's productions. Chen concluded that while definitive proof remained elusive, the circumstantial case was strong enough to warrant serious consideration. Critics accused her of seeing patterns where none existed. But her work inspired others. Today, a small community of researchers continues investigating the intersection of intelligence operations and film production. They found other suspicious cases, other disappearances, other inventory anomalies. The Harkness case may not be unique. It might be paradigmatic. The story of Lane Harkness exists at the intersection of American mythology and American paranoia. The Western, our foundational genre, being used to mask covert warfare. It's almost too perfect. It suggests that even our entertainment, our national myths about cowboys and justice, were compromised by Cold War realities. This resonates in our current era of distrust toward institutions. Whether the theory is true matters less, for some, than what it represents, the gap between official narratives and hidden operations. The feeling that we're always watching shadows on a cave wall, never seeing what's real. Perhaps that's the real legacy of Lane Harkness, not what he did, but what his story reveals about our relationship with truth in a national security state. Here's what we don't have: definitive proof. No confession from Harkness. No declassified CIA memo explicitly naming him. No witness who can testify to seeing him load weapons instead of props. The evidence is suggestive, circumstantial, maddeningly incomplete. This is the nature of conspiracy theories, especially those involving intelligence agencies. The absence of evidence becomes evidence itself, proof of a cover-up. But intellectual honesty requires acknowledging that sometimes, absence of evidence is just absence. The gaps in the story might be gaps in documentation, not proof of deception. We're left weighing probabilities, not certainties. Which is uncomfortable, but perhaps closer to truth than comfortable certainty ever is. Mexican researchers have their own theories about Harkness and the weapons found at Paramount. Some suggest the operation, if it existed, wasn't purely American. Mexican intelligence services in the 1950s were navigating their own complex relationship with the United States and with leftist movements in Latin America. The Mexican government may have been aware of, or even complicit in, weapons transit across their territory. Film productions offered convenient cover that served multiple interests. This perspective complicates the narrative. It wasn't just the CIA using Hollywood, but potentially a multinational arrangement where everyone benefited from plausible deniability. The movies were a stage, and everyone was acting. Why does this story fascinate us? Perhaps because it combines elements we find irresistible: Hollywood glamour, government secrets, an ordinary man caught in extraordinary circumstances. Lane Harkness wasn't James Bond. He was a working stiff who fell off horses for $75 a day. If he was an intelligence asset, he was unglamorous, expendable, forgotten. That makes him more compelling than any movie spy. His story, if true, reveals how covert operations actually work. Not through superhuman agents, but through ordinary people doing mundane tasks that serve hidden agendas. The bureaucracy of deception. The paperwork of conspiracy. This is darker and more disturbing than any thriller, because it's plausible. It could be true. In our current era of mass surveillance, private military contractors, and information warfare, the Harkness theory feels almost quaint. Smuggling rifles through movie studios. Today's operations involve drones, cyber attacks, encrypted communications. But the fundamental dynamic remains unchanged. Civilian infrastructure being used for military and intelligence purposes. Plausible deniability. Ordinary people unwittingly or wittingly serving national security objectives. The technology evolves, the methods adapt, but the essential practice continues. If Lane Harkness was doing in 1952 what the theory claims, we might ask, what equivalent operations are happening now, using today's industries as cover? And who are today's Lane Harknesses, working in tech companies, NGOs, media organizations? One reason the Harkness case remains unresolved is archival. Studio records from that era are incomplete. The major fire at Universal Studios in 2008 destroyed decades of documentation. Paramount's own archival practices were haphazard until the 1970s. CIA records remain heavily redacted, and documents related to failed operations are often destroyed or permanently sealed. We're trying to reconstruct a picture from fragments, shadows, second-hand testimony. This is the challenge for all Cold War research. The evidence is missing, by design or by accident. What we know is what survived. And survival is rarely random. Documents are preserved because they're politically safe or historically valuable. The most sensitive material. That burns. That disappears. Just like Lane Harkness. If the theory is true, it raises uncomfortable ethical questions. Were studio executives aware? Did directors know their films were providing cover for weapons smuggling? What about other crew members? Were they complicit, or just unknowing participants? And what responsibility does Hollywood bear for potentially enabling covert operations that led to violence in Central America? These aren't abstract questions. People died in Guatemala and Nicaragua. Families were destroyed. If American weapons reached those conflicts through Hollywood logistics, the industry shares moral responsibility. But proving that connection is virtually impossible. Which is, perhaps, exactly the point. Plausible deniability protects everyone. Except the dead. Lane Harkness was a stuntman who disappeared in 1956. The rest is speculation, circumstantial evidence, and fragments that might form a picture or might just be noise. Was he an intelligence asset who helped smuggle weapons through Hollywood studios to CIA operations in Central America? The evidence is suggestive but not conclusive. The timing is suspicious but not definitive. The crates at Paramount raise questions but don't answer them. What we're left with is a story that feels true, even if we can't prove it. Maybe that's what matters. Not the truth itself, but our willingness to question official narratives, to recognize that institutions keep secrets, and that sometimes, the invisible people, the stuntmen, the couriers, the expendable assets, know more than history remembers. Lane Harkness is still missing. And so, perhaps, is the whole story.